He walked 100 miles with nothing but a secret that could destroy a king. Starving, barefoot, and desperate, Ilara arrives at the castle gates with words that make the guards go pale. "I've come to marry the king." 20 years ago, he saved her from flames and made her a promise. But the truth she carries isn't about gratitude or childhood memories. It's about blood, betrayal, and a letter hidden against her skin that could topple a crown. The king who pulled her from that burning village is not the hero everyone believes him to be. As the castle doors close behind her, Ilara realizes she's walked into something far more dangerous than she imagined. The royal court is a nest of vipers, and her arrival has awakened secrets that powerful people would kill to keep buried. Her own mother's past unravels like a nightmare, connecting her to a rebellion that nearly destroyed the kingdom. Every ally might be an enemy. Every truth might be a lie. And the king himself, the man she came to manipulate, is hiding a murder that has haunted him for 2 decades. But here's what no one expected. The girl who came to blackmail a king for survival is about to discover that some secrets are worth dying for, and some loves are worth burning the whole world down to protect. The question isn't whether she'll become queen. The question is whether either of them will survive long enough to say their vows. Because in a castle where everyone is playing chess with human lives, Ilara just realized she might not be the player. She might be the pawn about to be sacrificed. The guards at the castle gate didn't laugh when she said she'd come to marry the king. That should have been her first warning. Their faces went pale instead, hands tightening on their spears as if she'd announced plague in the village. One of them, younger than the others with a scar splitting his eyebrow, stepped back like she'd struck him. The morning fog clung to the stone walls behind them, thick and cold, and somewhere in that silence she heard her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "State your name," the older guard said, his voice careful, measured, too measured, like he was speaking to someone balancing on a cliff edge. "Ilara," she said, forcing her chin up even as her hands trembled inside the rough wool of her cloak. "Ilara from Thornfield Village. And I'm not joking. 20 years ago, your king saved my life when raiders burned our homes. He carried me out of the flames himself. I was 6 years old. He promised he'd remember me." The words tasted like ash. She'd practiced them for 3 months, walking the 100 miles from what remained of Thornfield, sleeping in ditches, stealing bread from market stalls when the hunger became unbearable. Every step had been leading to this moment. Every bruised foot, every cold night, every humiliation. The younger guard exchanged a glance with his companion. Something passed between them, something that made her stomach twist. "Wait here," the older one said, disappearing through a side door that led into the gatehouse. The oak door slammed shut with a sound that echoed off the stones like a judge's gavel. She stood there, exposed in the courtyard, aware of eyes watching from the arrow slits above. The morning sun was climbing higher now, burning off the fog, and she could smell the horses in the nearby stables, the bread baking somewhere deep inside the castle walls. Her mouth watered. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The last of all. Her coins had gone to a ferryman 3 villages back. When the door opened again, it wasn't the guard who emerged. A man in rich burgundy robes stepped out, his silver hair pulled back severely from a face that looked like it had never smiled in its entire existence. His eyes swept over her, taking in her mud-stained dress, her calloused hands, the way her shoulders hunched slightly from years of working in fields that would never be hers. "I am Lord Aldrich, the king's chief advisor," he said. His voice was smooth as oiled leather. "You claim His Majesty saved you during the Thornfield raid 20 years ago. I don't claim it. It happened." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance. Fear. It vanished too quickly for her to catch. Many people believe they were saved by our king during that terrible time. The fog of war, the chaos of fire, a child's confused memories. I wasn't confused, she cut him off, and immediately regretted it. You didn't interrupt nobles. That lesson had been beaten into her since childhood. But his condescension scraped against something raw inside her chest. He had a scar on his left hand, shaped like a crescent moon. I saw it when he lifted me. His eyes were gray, like storm clouds, and he told me—" Her voice caught and she hated herself for it. "He told me I was safe now, that he'd never forget the brave little girl from Thornfield." Lord Aldrich's expression didn't change, but his fingers twitched. Just once. A tiny movement that most people would have missed. Ilara had spent her entire life watching nobles for signs of mood changes, learning to read the tightening of a jaw that meant someone was about to be whipped, the narrowing of eyes that meant taxes would increase. She'd become fluent in the language of power. "The king is occupied with matters of state," Aldrich said. "However, given the unusual nature of your claim, I will arrange an audience. Tomorrow morning. You may spend the night in the servants' quarters." "I'll wait right here," she said, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. For the first time, Aldrich's mask slipped. His eyes hardened to ice. "Girl, you will do as you're told, or you'll find yourself in the dungeons instead of a warm bed. Do you understand?" The threat hung in the air between them. She'd expected resistance, expected them to turn her away at the gate. She hadn't expected this barely contained rage, this desperation to keep her away from the king. Servants' quarters meant isolation, meant control over who she could speak to, what she could see. It meant vulnerability, but refusing meant the dungeons, and from a dungeon she couldn't reach anyone. From a dungeon, the truth died with her. "I understand, my lord," she said quietly, bowing her head. The younger guard was summoned to escort her. He walked 3 paces ahead, never looking back, his shoulders rigid with tension. They crossed the outer courtyard where knights were training, their swords clanging against shields. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and it reminded her of the blacksmith back home. Before the drought, before the debts, before she'd found the letter hidden in her dead mother's belongings, written in a shaking hand, sealed with wax that bore the royal crest. The servants' quarters were tucked behind the kitchens, small stone rooms barely large enough for a cot and a chamber pot. The guard opened a door and gestured inside without speaking. She entered, and he locked the door behind her. Locked, not latched. Locked. She sat on the cot, feeling the thin straw mattress through the rough blanket. Her hands were shaking again, and this time she couldn't stop them. Through the tiny window, she could see a corner of the keep where the king's chambers would be. Where he was right now, perhaps looking out his own window, unaware that the past he'd tried to bury was sleeping 50 yards away. She pulled the letter from inside her bodice, unfolding it. Carefully. The parchment was yellowed, delicate as moth wings. She'd read it so many times the words were seared into her mind, but she read them again anyway. The letter that proved King Edmund hadn't saved anyone that day. The letter that proved he'd murdered his own brother in the chaos of the raid and taken a crown that was never his. The letter that would destroy everything. And tomorrow she would look into his eyes and watch him realize that his past had finally found him. Sleep never came. Ilara lay on the cot listening to the castle wake up around her, the sounds filtering through stone walls like whispers of a world she'd never belonged to. Servants hurried past her door before dawn, their footsteps quick and purposeful. Somewhere close by, a woman was crying, the sound muffled but unmistakable. The kind of crying that came from exhaustion, not grief. The kind Ilara knew in her bones. Her stomach cramped with hunger. The smell of baking bread from the kitchens was torture, rich and yeasty, making saliva pool under her tongue. She pressed her palm against her belly, trying to quiet the growling, and felt the letter still tucked against her skin. The parchment was warm from her body heat. It had been her constant companion for 3 months, ever since she'd pried up the loose floorboard in her mother's cottage and found it wrapped in oilcloth, hidden like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. When the key turned in the lock, she sat up so fast her head spun. The door opened to reveal a girl not much younger than herself, maybe 17, carrying a wooden tray. The girl's eyes were downcast, her movements practiced and small, like she'd learned to take up as little space as possible. "Lord Aldrich says you're to eat and make yourself presentable," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. She set the tray on the floor rather than the cot, as if afraid to come too close. "There's water in the basin. Clean dress on the hook." "Wait," Ilara said, as the girl turned to leave. "What's your name?" The girl froze, her shoulders tensed, and for a heartbeat Ilara thought she wouldn't answer. "Mira," she finally said, still not looking up. "Mira, can you tell me something?" Ilara kept her voice gentle, non-threatening. "Why is everyone here so frightened?" Now Mira did look up, and her eyes were wide with something that looked like pity or warning. "You should eat, miss. The king doesn't like to be kept waiting." She left before Ilara could ask. "Anything else?" The door locking again with that awful finality. The tray held bread, cheese, and a small cup of watered wine. Ilara's hands shook as she reached for the bread, tearing into it like an animal. She forced herself to slow down, to chew properly, even though every instinct screamed to devour it all at once. In the 3 months since leaving Thornfield, she'd learned that eating too fast after starving made you sick. The dress on the hook was simple, but clean, undyed linen that would mark her clearly as a commoner, even in nicer clothing. They weren't trying to hide what she was. That was something at least. She washed her face and hands in the basin, scrubbing away 3 days of road dust, and changed into the dress. Her old one she folded carefully, tucking the letter deep into its folds before hiding it under the thin mattress. Bringing it to the audience would be too risky. Not yet. First, she needed to see his face. Needed to know if the man who ruled this kingdom had any conscience left at all. When Lord Aldrich came for her an hour later, he wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked him, hands resting on sword hilts. Like she was dangerous. Like a starving peasant girl could threaten anyone in this fortress of stone and steel. "The king will see you now," Aldrich said. His face was even more severe in the morning light streaming through the narrow windows. "You will address him as your majesty. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will bow when you enter and when you leave. Do you understand?" "I understand." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. They walked through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate, each one grander than the last. Tapestries hung on the walls depicting battles and coronations, their threads rich with gold and crimson. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold stone floors. They'd taken her shoes during the night, she realized now. Another way to keep her vulnerable, off balance. The throne room doors were 12 feet tall, carved oak reinforced with iron. The guards pushed them open with effort, the hinges groaning like something wounded. Inside, the ceiling soared so high it seemed to touch heaven itself. Morning light poured through stained glass windows, painting the floor in pools of ruby and sapphire. And at the far end, elevated on a dais of white marble, sat the throne. Sat the king. Her breath caught. After 20 years, after 100 miles of walking, after all the rehearsing and planning, she hadn't prepared for this, the way her body would remember before her mind did. The breadth of his shoulders, the way he held his head, slightly tilted, like he was always listening for something just beyond hearing. His hair was more silver than brown now, his face lined with the weight of 2 decades of rule. But those eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were exactly as she remembered. "Approach," Lord Aldrich said, his voice echoing off the stones. She walked forward, her legs trembling, and dropped into a bow. When she reached the base of the dais, the marble was ice-cold against her knees. She stayed down, waiting, her heart throwing itself against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Rise," the king said, and his voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by age and authority. "Look at me." She stood slowly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. His expression was unreadable, controlled in the way only powerful men could manage. But his left hand, resting on the throne's arm, was clenched tight enough that his knuckles had gone white. "You claim I saved you during the Thornfield raid," he said. "It wasn't a question." "You did, Your Majesty." Her voice sounded small in the vast room. "I was 6 years old. My mother had died in the fire, and I was trapped in our cottage. You broke through the door and carried me out. You had ash on your face and blood on your tunic. You told me I was safe. Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. Many children were saved that day. Why should I? Remember you specifically. This was it, the moment she'd been building toward. Because, she said, and heard her voice crack despite all her preparation. Because when you set me down outside the village, I asked if you were an angel. And you laughed. You said angels don't bleed. Then you showed me the cut on your left hand and promised you'd never forget the brave little girl from Thornfield. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lord Aldrich had gone very still beside the throne. The guards by the door shifted their weight. And the king was staring at his left hand like he'd never seen it before. Slowly, he unclenched his fist and turned his palm upward. There, white and faded with age but unmistakable, was a crescent-shaped scar. Impossible, Aldrich whispered, but the king raised his other hand, silencing him. What is your name? The king asked, his voice strange now, hollow. Ilara, your majesty, Ilara of Thornfield. He stood abruptly, descending the dais steps. With measured control, each footfall echoed like a death knell. He stopped 3 paces away, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his beard, the fine lines around his eyes, close enough to see the fear swimming beneath that controlled exterior. Why have you come? He asked quietly. After 20 years, why now? She met his eyes and saw her own reflection there, small and insignificant. Because, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, you made me a promise, and I've come to collect. His jaw tightened. I made no promises beyond keeping you safe that day. Didn't you? She let the words hang between them, weighted with meaning. Are you certain there's nothing else you promised? Nothing else you did that day that you'd rather forget? The king's face went pale as parchment. Behind him, Lord Aldrich took a step forward, hand moving toward his belt. But it was the king's expression that told her everything she needed to know. The guilt, the recognition, the dawning horror of a past he thought he'd buried. He knew exactly what she was talking about. The king's hand shot out and gripped her arm, his fingers pressing hard enough to bruise. We speak alone, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Now. Lord Aldrich moved forward, alarm written across his angular face. Your Majesty, that would be most unwise. We don't know who this woman truly is, what she might... Leave us. The king's voice cracked like a whip. All of you, out. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but they knew better than to disobey a direct order. Aldrich's mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval, his eyes boring into Ilara with pure hatred, before he bowed stiffly and retreated. The massive doors groaned shut, and suddenly the throne room felt impossibly vast, emptied of everyone except a king and the girl who held his darkest secret. Edmund released her arm and stepped back, running both hands through his hair. The gesture was so human, so stripped of royal composure, that for a moment Ilara almost forgot why she'd come, almost forgot the letter hidden beneath her mattress, the words that could destroy him. How much do you know? He asked, his back to her. His shoulders rose and fell with rapid breathing, like a man who'd just run for his life. Enough, she said. Her own heart was racing now, blood rushing in her ears. This was the moment everything could collapse. If she pushed too hard, he could have her killed. A peasant girl. Disappearing from the castle would raise no questions. If she revealed too little, he might call her bluff. I know what happened to your brother. He spun around, and the raw terror in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Who told you? Who else knows? Does it matter? She forced herself to stand firm, to not back away from the desperation radiating off him in waves. The truth exists whether 10 people know it or 1. The truth, he repeated, and laughed bitterly. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, coming back hollow and broken. The truth. Do you know what the truth would do to this kingdom? The chaos it would unleash? The thousands who would die in the civil war that would follow? I know what it would do to you, she said quietly. He stared at her, and she watched him cycle through emotions like a man drowning. Rage, fear, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. That last one surprised her. "What do you want?" he asked. "Money? Land? A title for whatever family you have left? I want what you promised me." The words came out stronger than she felt. "I want to marry you." The silence that followed was absolute. The king blinked once, twice, as if he'd misheard. "You want to what?" "Marry you." She pressed her palms together to stop them shaking. "I've thought about this for 3 months. A generous payment, a small estate, those things can be taken away. They can be revoked, stolen, lost. But a wife, a queen, that's permanent. That's protected by law and God and witnessed by the entire kingdom." Edmund shook his head slowly, something like awe mixing with the disbelief on his face. "You're insane. The nobility would never accept it. A peasant queen? They'd riot. They'd call for my abdication." "Then you'd better be very convincing about our love story." She took a step closer, emboldened by his confusion. The brave king who saved a child and never forgot her, who searched for her for 20 years, who finally found his true love in the most unlikely place. It's romantic. People love romance. They'll eat it up like honey cakes. "And if I refuse?" His voice had gone cold again, the king reasserting control. "If I have you thrown in the dungeons right now and let you rot with your secrets? Then the letter gets delivered." She watched his face carefully. "I'm not stupid, Your Majesty. I didn't walk 100 miles without insurance. If I don't return to my contact in 3 days' time, if anything happens to me, the letter goes to the High Bishop, and the High Bishop, from what I understand, is not particularly fond of you. He'd love an excuse to question the legitimacy of your crown." It was a bluff, a complete, desperate bluff. There was no contact, no backup plan. The letter was under her mattress, and if she died, it died with her. But she said it with such conviction that she saw doubt flicker across his face. Edmund moved to one of the tall windows, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the castle grounds stretched green and peaceful under morning sun. Gardeners tended roses. Stable boys led horses to pasture, life continuing in blissful ignorance of the knife edge they all balanced on. "Tell me something," he said without turning around. "Do you hate me for what I did?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected threats, bargaining, anger, not this quiet vulnerability. "I don't know you well enough to hate you," she said honestly. "I know what you did 20 years ago. I don't know who you've been since." He turned then, and his face was older somehow, carved with exhaustion. "I think about it every day," he said. "Every single day for 20 years. My brother," his voice caught. "Thomas was going to destroy this kingdom. He was reckless, cruel, drunk on power he hadn't earned. That night, in the chaos of the raid, when I found him standing over the body of a child he'd just killed for sport." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I didn't plan it. My sword was in my hand, and then it was in his chest, and then he was dead, and the crown was mine." Ilara felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the story she'd expected. The letter mentioned a murder, a usurpation, but not this. Not a child. Not justified rage. He killed a child. "A boy," Edmund whispered. "Maybe 8 years old. Laughing while he did it. Said it was practice for the battlefield." He met her eyes, and she saw the weight of 2 decades crushing down on him. "So yes, I killed my brother. I took his crown. And I have spent every day since trying to be the king he never could have been. I've ended unjust taxes, created laws protecting the weak, turned away from wars of conquest. I've tried." His voice broke. "God help me. I've tried to make his death mean something." She stood there, frozen, as her carefully constructed plan began crumbling around her. She'd expected a monster, a villain she could manipulate without guilt. Instead, she'd found a man carrying impossible weight, trying to balance murder against mercy, sin against salvation. "The letter," he said. "Who wrote it?" "I don't know." The honesty surprised her. It was in my mother's things, hidden. She died 3 months ago without telling me about it. And you decided to use it for blackmail. He said it without judgment, just stating fact. I decided to use it to survive, she corrected. My village is dying. Drought killed the crops 2 years running. Half the people have already left. Searching for work that doesn't exist. I had 2 choices, starve slowly in Thornfield or take a chance on this. She gestured at the opulent room around them. I chose this. Edmund studied her for a long moment, and she felt exposed under that gray gaze, like he was reading every desperate calculation that had led her to his throne room. You're braver than most nobles I know, he finally said. Or more foolish. I haven't decided which. Can I be both? The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. What's your real name? Your full name? Ilara Thorne. Daughter of Margaret Thorne, who died of fever. Father unknown. The last part tasted bitter. She'd been a bastard her whole life, marked by it, limited by it. Ilara Thorne, he repeated slowly, as if testing how it sounded. And if I agreed to this madness, and I'm not saying I am, what would you do as queen, besides blackmail your husband? She'd thought about this part too, lying awake in barns and ditches during her long journey. I'd remember where I came from, she said. I'd make sure that girls like me have options beyond starving or selling themselves. I'd make sure the crown doesn't forget the people it's supposed to serve. Something changed in his expression then. A calculation, cold and sharp. You realize, he said softly, that if we marry, I could simply kill you on our wedding night. A tragic accident. A weak constitution. Who would question it? Her blood went cold, but she kept her voice steady. Then the letter still gets delivered. I told you. 3 days. You're lying. He said it with certainty. There is no contact. If there was, you wouldn't be this frightened right now. Her heart stopped. He'd seen through her. Of course he had. He hadn't survived 20 years on a stolen throne by being stupid. Then I guess, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, you'll have to decide if you're the kind of man who kills girls or the kind who killed his brother to stop him from becoming that. The king stared at her, and in his eyes she saw her entire future balanced on the edge of his conscience. The king didn't answer her challenge. Instead, he walked to a side door she hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a tapestry depicting St. Michael slaying a dragon. Come with me, he said, and it wasn't a request. Ilara followed, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. They descended a narrow spiral staircase, the walls pressing close on either side, the air growing cooler with each step down. No guards followed, no witnesses, just the 2 of them spiraling deeper into the castle's hidden depths, and with each turn, Ilara's certainty that she'd miscalculated grew heavier in her chest. They emerged into a small chamber lit by a single window, the glass thick and wavy with age. The room was sparse, a desk, 2 chairs, shelves lined with leather-bound books. No throne, no crown, no trappings of royalty, just a workspace worn smooth by years of use. This is where I come when I can't sleep, Edmund said, closing the door behind them, which is most nights. He moved to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. Do you know what these are? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Confessions, he said, written by my own hand, dated and sealed. 23 of them, 1 for each year since I took the crown. Every detail of what I did that night, how I killed Thomas, how I claimed the throne, was attacked by raiders when it was really me, how I let innocent men hang for his murder. He set the bundle down carefully, like it might explode. I write one every year on the anniversary. My penance, I suppose, my insurance that if I ever become the monster my brother was, someone will find these and stop me. Ilara stared at the letters, her mind reeling. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand something. He pulled out one of the chairs and sat heavily, suddenly, looking every one of his 40-some years. The letter your mother had. I know who wrote it. There were 3 people in that village who saw what really happened. One was a soldier named Marcus, loyal to Thomas. He disappeared the next day, and I assumed he'd deserted. The second was a priest who died of natural causes 5 years ago. And the third, he paused, his jaw working. The third was a woman I pulled from a burning cottage. She was badly burned, dying. I thought she'd never survive the night. The room seemed to tilt. My mother? I didn't know her name then. She was unconscious when I found her, barely breathing. But she'd seen everything through her window. Thomas killing that boy. Me driving my sword through my brother's back. He met her eyes, and the pain there was raw and real. I stayed with her until the healers came. I held her hand and I prayed, because even though she could destroy me, I couldn't let her die alone. And when she opened her eyes for just a moment, she looked at me and whispered, "Thank you." Then she lost consciousness again. Ilara's legs gave out. She gripped the back of the other chair, her knuckles white. She never told me. 20 years, and she never said a word. "Maybe she was protecting you," Edmund said quietly. "Or maybe she was protecting me. I don't know. But that letter she wrote, it was her insurance, just like these are mine. A way to make sure the truth didn't die with her." He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the courtyard below. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. After she recovered, and I made sure she had the best healers, though she never knew I was the one paying for it, she never tried to use what she knew. Never asked for anything." "She was dying," Ilara said, the words scraping out of her throat. "The fever. She knew she was dying, and she hid that letter where she knew I'd find it eventually. She wanted me to have a choice. And you chose blackmail." He said it without heat, just exhausted. "Acceptance. I chose survival." Her voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like to watch your mother waste away because you can't afford medicine? To bury her in a pauper's grave because the church charges 2 silver coins for blessed ground? To sit in an empty cottage and realize you have absolutely nothing, that you are nothing, and the world will go on exactly the same whether you live or die?" He turned from the window, and something in his expression had softened. "No," he admitted. "I don't know that. I've lived in castles my entire life. I've never gone hungry, never wondered where I'd sleep. The worst thing that ever happened to me was being born second, knowing the crown would never be mine unless—" He stopped. "Unless I took it." They stood in silence, 2 people from completely different worlds, bound together by secrets and survival, and the terrible weight of choices neither of them could undo. "I need to know something," Edmund said finally. "When you walked into that throne room this morning, did you plan to destroy me? Or were you always planning to bargain?" Ilara thought about lying. But what was the point now? "I didn't know," she said honestly. "I thought I'd see you and feel nothing but hatred. I thought it would be easy to watch you squirm, to take pleasure in your fear. But then," she wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold, "you weren't what I expected. And now I don't know what I'm doing anymore. That makes 2 of us." He moved back to the desk, his fingers trailing across the bundle of confessions. "Lord Aldrich will fight this with everything he has. He's been trying to marry me off to Princess Isabella of Crestfall for 3 years. An alliance that would secure our borders and fill the treasury. Marrying you would ruin those plans." "Then maybe," Ilara said slowly, an idea forming, "maybe we don't tell him the real reason. Maybe we sell the love story. The king who never forgot the little girl he saved, who spent 20 years searching. Star-crossed lovers reunited. Make it so romantic, so compelling, that opposing it makes them look heartless." Edmund studied her with something that might have been respect. "You have a devious mind. I've had 3 months to plan this. And if I agree, if I actually go through with this insanity, what happens to the letter? Your insurance?" She hesitated. This was the moment that would define everything. "I burn it," she said. "On our wedding night, in front of you. No more." "Blackmail, no more threats. Just—" She struggled for the right words. Just two people trying to survive the choices they've made. You'd give up your only leverage? Leverage only works if you're willing to use it, she said. And I'm starting to think that destroying you would destroy the only good thing that came from that terrible night. She met his eyes. You're not your brother. I can see that now. Maybe you took the crown the wrong way, but you've worn it the right way. That has to count for something. Edmund was quiet for a long moment, and she watched emotions chase across his face. Doubt, hope, fear, something that looked almost like gratitude. The court will eat you alive, he said finally. They'll call you ambitious, manipulative, a gold digger. They'll say you bewitched me, that you're using dark magic or seduction or whatever explanation makes them feel better about a commoner wearing a crown. Let them, she said with more confidence than she felt. I've been called worse by better people. The corner of his mouth twitched again, that almost smile. You're going to be terrible at royal etiquette. Probably. She found herself smiling back just a little. But I'll learn. I'm good at surviving. He nodded slowly, decision crystallizing in his expression. 3 conditions, he said. First, you tell me everything about that letter. Where it is, what it says exactly, everything. No more secrets between us. Second, you learn everything you need to know. About being queen. Protocol, history, diplomacy. I'll arrange tutors. You have 6 months before we announce the engagement officially. Third, he paused, his voice dropping. You never ever tell anyone the truth about why you really came here. Not your closest friend, not your lady's maid, not even me after we've had too much wine. That secret dies with us. Agreed, she said without hesitation. But I have one condition of my own. His eyebrows rose. You're bargaining. Now? Always? She lifted her chin. You arrange for food and supplies to be sent to Thornfield. Enough to get them through until the next harvest. Not as charity from the crown. I don't want them to know it came from me. Just quietly make sure they don't starve. Something shifted in his expression then, a warmth she hadn't seen before. Done, he said quietly. I'll send the supplies within the week. They stood there in that small hidden room, and Alara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd come here. For survival, for security, for revenge against a world that had given her nothing. But looking at this tired, guilty, complicated man in front of her, she realized she'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than blackmail. She'd stumbled into the possibility of actually caring what happened to him. Edmund extended his hand. Partners then, in this elaborate deception? She looked at his hand, at the crescent scar on his palm, and thought about how strange it was that the same hand that had killed a king was now offering to save her. She reached out and clasped it, feeling the calluses on his fingers, the strength in his grip. Partners, she agreed. The door burst open, and Lord Aldrich stood there, flanked by 4 guards, his face twisted with fury. Your Majesty, he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. I've just received word from our informant. This woman's mother was no ordinary peasant. She was a spy for the Northern Rebellion. And this girl, he pointed at Alara like she was something diseased, has been sent to assassinate you. The air in the small room turned to ice. Alara's hand was still clasped in Edmund's, and she felt his fingers tighten reflexively before he released her. The guards moved into position, blocking the doorway, hands on sword hilts. Lord Aldrich's eyes gleamed with something that looked dangerously close to triumph. That's absurd, Alara said. But her voice came out thin, strangled. Her heart was throwing itself against her ribs so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. My mother was a weaver. She never left Thornfield in her entire life. Your mother, Aldrich said, pulling a rolled parchment from his robes with theatrical precision, was Margaret Thorne, born Margaret Ashford in the Northern Territories, sister to Robert Ashford, who led the rebellion against the crown 15 years ago. A rebellion that cost us 3,000 lives and nearly tore this kingdom apart. He unrolled the parchment, holding it up like evidence at a trial. We have records, girl. Bloodline documentation. Your mother fled south after her brother was executed for treason. changed her name, and disappeared into obscurity, until now. The room tilted. Ilara grabbed the back of the chair to keep from falling, her mind racing through every conversation she'd ever had with her mother, searching for hints, for clues, for anything that would make this make sense. Margaret had been quiet, yes, private about her past. But a rebel's sister? It was impossible. It had to be impossible. "Lord Aldrich," Edmund said, his voice deadly calm, "where exactly did you get this information?" "From our network of informants, Your Majesty. The same network that has kept you safe for 20 years. Aldrich's smile was razor-thin. "When this girl arrived yesterday claiming a connection to you, I naturally made inquiries. Imagine my shock when I discovered her true lineage. The timing is too convenient. The story too practiced. She's been sent to get close to you, to gain your trust, and then..." He drew a finger across his throat. "That's not true," Ilara said, finding her voice. "I didn't even know. My mother never told me." She looked at Edmund desperately. "You have to believe me. I came here because of the letter, because I was starving, not because of some rebellion that ended before I was even born." Edmund's face was unreadable, that royal mask firmly back in place. She watched him look at her, really look at her, and she could see him calculating, weighing her words against Aldrich's evidence. The partnership they'd formed minutes ago felt suddenly fragile as spun glass. "Show me the documentation," Edmund said to Aldrich. The advisor moved forward, holding out the parchment. Edmund took it, his eyes scanning the contents. Ilara watched his expression, trying to read any hint of what he was thinking. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. "This proves bloodline," Edmund said finally. "It doesn't prove conspiracy." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty, with respect, the connection alone is damning. Robert Ashford's dying words were that his family would have vengeance, that his blood would see the crown fall. And now his niece appears at your gates with a convenient story about being saved as a child. It's an obvious ploy." "Except," Edmund said slowly, "she was saved as a child. I remember her. The timing matches, the details match. Unless you're suggesting the rebels somehow orchestrated a raid on Thornfield 20 years ago specifically to plant a 6-year-old sleeper agent?" Put that way, it did sound ridiculous. Ilara felt a flicker of hope kindle in her chest, but Aldrich wasn't finished. "I'm suggesting," he said carefully, "that perhaps your memory has been influenced by a clever manipulation. That this woman researched the raid, learned details, and is exploiting your guilt about that day to gain access. Your Majesty, you are too trusting. It's one of your few weaknesses." "My guilt?" Edmund's voice dropped to something dangerous. "What exactly would I have to feel guilty about regarding the Thornfield raid?" The room went very still. Aldrich's eyes narrowed, sensing he'd stepped onto unstable ground. "Nothing, Your Majesty. I only meant the natural remorse any good king would feel about civilian casualties. Nothing more." Ilara watched the exchange, her pulse hammering. There was something happening here beneath the surface, currents she didn't fully understand. Aldrich was too insistent, too prepared. This wasn't just about protecting the king. This was about something else. "My lord," one of the guards said hesitantly, "should we secure the prisoner?" "She's not a prisoner," Edmund said sharply. "Not yet." He turned to Ilara, and she couldn't read his expression at all. "These are serious accusations. You understand that?" "I understand that they're lies," she said, putting every ounce of conviction she possessed into the words. "Or at least, the part about me being an assassin is a lie. I didn't know about my mother's past. I swear it on her grave." "Swearing means nothing," Aldrich interjected. "She could be a master deceiver. These rebels are trained from childhood." "Enough." Edmund's command cut through the room like a blade. "Here's what's going to happen. Ilara will be confined to comfortable quarters. Not the dungeons, Aldrich, don't even suggest it. While I investigate these claims. Personally, I want to see every piece of evidence, every source, every link in the chain that led you to this conclusion, and I want it by sunset today. Your Majesty, the risk..." Is mine to take. Edmund's voice was steel. She came here unarmed, alone, and half-starved. If she's an assassin, she's the worst trained one in history. Now go. Get me that evidence. Aldrich's face flushed with anger, but he bowed stiffly. As you command, Your Majesty. He swept from the room, the guards following, leaving just two behind at Edmund's gesture. When the door closed again, Edmund turned to Alara. She couldn't tell if the exhaustion in his eyes was for her or because of her. Did you know? He asked quietly. Any of it? No. Her throat was tight with unshed tears. My mother told me my father was a traveling merchant who died before I was born. She said her family was dead, that she had no one. I thought... Her voice broke. I thought we were alone in the world. Just us against everything. I didn't know she was protecting me from something. Edmund studied her face, and she let him look, let him see every ounce of truth she had. The Northern Rebellion was brutal, he said finally. Robert Ashford believed the Crown had failed the Northern Territories, let them starve during the famine while the South prospered. He wasn't entirely wrong. My brother's policies were cruel, short-sighted, but the rebellion... He shook his head. They burned villages, killed tax collectors, executed anyone suspected of Crown loyalty. It became about vengeance, not justice. When we finally cornered Robert's forces, he chose to fight to the last man rather than surrender. We lost thousands on both sides. And my mother's brother was the leader, Alara said numbly. Yes. Edmund moved to the window, staring out. I was young then, newly crowned, still trying to figure out how to be king. I wanted to show mercy to the survivors, but my advisors, Aldrich, chief among them, pushed for harsh punishment. Public executions, seized property, whole families exiled or imprisoned. I was convinced it was necessary to prevent future rebellions. And now? She asked. Now I think we created more enemies than we eliminated. He turned back to her. If your mother fled south and built a quiet life, never caused trouble, never contacted rebel sympathizers, then she made her choice. She chose peace over vengeance. That should mean something. Should, Alara repeated. But does it? The Deben question hung between them. Edmund opened his mouth to answer, but a sharp knock interrupted. One of the remaining guards stepped inside. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's a situation in the outer courtyard. A group of nobles have arrived. They're demanding an audience about rumors of... He hesitated. Of a potential engagement to a commoner. Edmund closed his eyes briefly. Word travels fast. Lord Aldrich sent messengers, sire, before he came to find you. Of course he did. Alara felt the trap closing around them. Aldrich hadn't just been investigating her background. He'd been preparing the court to reject her, building opposition before Edmund could even announce anything official. It was brilliant, in a ruthless sort of way. Escort Alara to the East Tower rooms, Edmund said to the guard. She's to be treated as a guest, not a prisoner. Make sure she has food, water, clean clothes, and post guards outside her door for her protection. He emphasized the last two words, making it clear this wasn't imprisonment. Your Majesty, Alara said urgently as the guard moved to take her arm. The letter. It's in my old dress under the mattress in the servants' quarters. If Aldrich finds it first, I'll retrieve it personally, Edmund promised. Go. We'll talk again after I deal with the nobles. The guard led her away, up different staircases this time, through corridors that grew progressively more opulent. The East Tower rooms, when they arrived, were stunning. Plush carpets, a four-poster bed with embroidered curtains, windows overlooking the gardens. It was the nicest room Alara had ever seen, and it felt exactly like a very comfortable cage. The guard left, locking the door with an apologetic expression. Alara moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, she could see nobles gathering in the courtyard, their rich clothes bright splashes of color against gray stone. They were angry, gesticulating, voices rising. Even though she couldn't make out words, she'd come here planning to manipulate a king, to secure her future through blackmail and deception. Instead, she'd stumbled into palace intrigue, bloodline conspiracies, and a past she'd never known existed. Her mother's face floated through her memory. Quiet, sad Margaret, who'd worked her fingers raw at the loom and never complained. Who'd hidden a letter that could destroy a king, and a past that could destroy her daughter. What else had Margaret been? Hiding. The door opened without warning. Ilara spun, expecting Edmund, but instead Mira stepped inside, carrying a tray of food. The young servant's eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands shook as she set the tray down. "I'm so sorry," Mira whispered, not meeting Ilara's eyes. "I didn't know what they'd do with the information. I didn't know." Ilara's blood turned to ice water. "What are you talking about?" Mira finally looked up, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Lord Aldrich pays me to report conversations I overhear. It's the only way I can send money home to my family. When you asked me why everyone was frightened yesterday, I told him. And then he started asking more questions, and I..." She covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing. "I'm the informant. I'm the reason they know about your mother. Oh God, I'm so sorry." Ilara stared at the sobbing girl, feeling her entire body go numb. The betrayal was so swift, so complete, that for a moment she couldn't process it. Mira, with her downcast eyes and frightened demeanor, had seemed like a potential ally. Instead, she'd been the dagger sliding between Ilara's ribs all along. "Get out," Ilara said, her voice flat and cold. "Please, you have to understand." Mira stepped forward, hands outstretched in supplication. "My mother is sick. My 3 younger brothers depend on the money I send. Lord Aldrich pays me 5 silver coins a month just for listening, for reporting small things. I never thought, I didn't realize it would lead to this." 5 silver coins. Ilara laughed, and the sound was bitter as spoiled wine. "You sold me for 5 silver coins. My mother worked herself to death for less than that, and she never betrayed anyone." Mira flinched like she'd been struck. "I know what I did was wrong, but you don't understand what it's like, trying to keep your family alive when every day is a choice between medicine and food, between rent and firewood. When someone offers you money for something as simple as conversation, you take it. You have to take it." "I do understand," Ilara said, moving closer until they were almost nose to nose. "I understand better than you think. But there's a difference between stealing bread to survive and destroying someone's life for pocket change. You didn't just tell Aldrich about our conversation. You gave him everything he needed to paint me as a traitor, an assassin. Do you know what happens to people accused of plotting against the king?" Mira's face crumpled. "He said it was just routine information gathering. He said the king needed to know who was in his castle. He never told me what he'd use it for. And you never asked." Ilara turned away, staring at the tray of food Mira had brought. The bread looked fresh, the cheese uncut, the wine dark and rich. She wondered if it was poisoned. She wondered if she even cared anymore. "Did Aldrich send you here to apologize, or to gather more information?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Ilara whirled, back around to find Mira frozen, guilt written across every line of her face. "He wanted to know if you'd say anything about the king," Mira whispered. "If you'd admit to being part of a plot. He said if I could get you to confess, he'd pay me 20 silver coins. Enough to bring my whole family here, to get them out of the north." The north. Something clicked in Ilara's mind. "You're from the northern territories, like my mother." Mira nodded miserably. "From a village near where the rebellion started. I was just a child then, but I remember the soldiers coming, the fires, the executions. Lord Aldrich found me 3 years ago, half-starved in the capital, and offered me work in the castle. I thought he was being kind." "Aldrich doesn't do kindness," Ilara said. "He does strategy." She paced to the window and back, her mind racing. He wanted someone from the north, someone with a connection to the rebellion, even if only by proximity. Someone who could identify others from that region, who could report on sympathies and whispered conversations. "You weren't hired as a servant, you were hired as a spy." "I know that now." Mira's voice broke. "But by the time I understood what I'd become, I was already trapped. If I stopped reporting, he'd dismiss me, and my family would starve. If I reported too much, I'd destroy innocent people. I've been walking a line for 3 years, trying to give him just enough to keep my position but not enough to hurt anyone. Until me. Alara felt something hard and cold settling in her chest. What exactly did you tell him about our conversation? Mira wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Just that you'd asked why everyone was frightened, that you seemed nervous. But then he started asking specific questions. Did you mention any family connections? Did you say where you were really from? Did you talk about the rebellion? I said no to everything because we barely spoke. But then he said he already had information about your mother from other sources, that he just needed confirmation. And she swallowed hard. I told him your mother's name was Margaret Thorne from Thornfield. I thought it was harmless. I didn't know he'd connect it to everything else. Alara closed her eyes. Margaret Thorne. Margaret Ashford. One name had led Aldrich to the other, and from there to the bloodline documentation, to the conspiracy theories, to the trap that was now closing around both Alara and Edmund. And all because a desperate girl had been trying to save her family. Does anyone else in this castle work for Aldrich the same way? Alara asked. I don't know. He keeps us separate, I think. I've never been told to coordinate with anyone else. But you suspect there are others. Mira nodded. Little things. The way certain servants always seem to be nearby when important conversations happen. The way information spreads faster than it should. This castle has eyes everywhere, and most of them belong to Lord Aldrich. A knock at the door made them both jump. Mira moved to answer it, but Alara grabbed her wrist. Wait, before you open that, I need to know, are you going to tell Aldrich about this conversation? Mira looked at Alara's hand on her wrist, then up at her face. Something shifted in her expression, a kind of desperate resolve. No, she said quietly. I'm done. Whatever he does to me, I'm done betraying people. I can't carry this anymore. He'll ruin you, Alara said. He'll make sure you never work again. Your family will have to survive without blood money, Mira finished. Her jaw set with determination that hadn't been there before. My mother didn't raise me to be this. If she knew what I'd become, it would kill her faster than any sickness. The knock came again, more insistent. Alara released Mira's wrist and nodded. The younger girl opened the door to reveal one of the guards, the same one who'd escorted Alara earlier. His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber, he said to Alara. Immediately. Alara's stomach dropped. Is that where he's meeting with the nobles? Yes, miss. The guard's expression was carefully neutral. Lord Aldrich has presented his evidence. The king wishes you to hear it and respond. This was it then. Trial by nobility, with her accused of treason based on bloodline she hadn't known existed. Alara thought of the letter hidden under her old mattress, if Edmund had even managed to retrieve it before. Aldrich's people found it. She thought of her mother, quiet Margaret, who'd carried the weight of rebellion and loss in silence for 20 years. She thought of Edmund standing in his hidden room, showing her his own confessions, trusting her with secrets that could destroy him. Tell His Majesty I'll come, she said, lifting her chin, but I need 5 minutes to prepare myself. The guard nodded and stepped back into the corridor, pulling the door closed but not locking it. A small mercy, or maybe just confidence that she had nowhere to run. Mira moved toward the door as well, but Alara stopped her. Wait, if you really meant what you said about being done with Aldrich, I need your help. What kind of help? Mira asked warily. Information. Alara kept her voice low. You've been in this castle for 3 years, watching, listening. You know things that I don't. I need to know exactly who Lord Aldrich is, what he wants, and why he's so desperate to keep the king from marrying me. Because this isn't just about protecting Edmund from a potential assassin. This is personal. Mira bit her lip, thinking. Lord Aldrich came to power during the Northern Rebellion. He was the one who convinced the young king, King Edmund, to take a hard line against the rebels. Before that, he was nobody, just a minor noble from a small estate. But after the rebellion, he became essential. The king's right hand. Some people say She hesitated. Say what? Alara pressed. Some people say that Lord Aldrich orchestrated parts of the rebellion himself, that he wanted it to happen, needed it to happen, so he could position himself as the solution. I don't know if it's true. It's just whispers in the servants' halls, the kind of thing you hear and then forget because it's too dangerous to remember. Alara felt pieces clicking into place, a rebellion that elevated Aldrich to power, a king who felt guilty about his harsh response to it. And now, 20 years later, a woman appearing who could potentially undermine Aldrich's influence if she became queen. He's not trying to protect Edmund from me, she said slowly. He's trying to protect his own position. If you marry the king, you'd have his ear, Mira said, understanding dawning. You'd be able to influence decisions, policy. Lord Aldrich has spent 2 decades as the voice in the king's ear. He's not going to give that up without a fight. The door opened again, and the guard reappeared. Miss, the king is waiting. Alara straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the simple linen dress. No crown, no jewels, no armor. Just a peasant girl about to face down the entire noble class. I'm ready. She followed the guard down the corridor, and behind her she heard Mira whisper something that might have been a prayer, or might have been an apology. The council chamber was in the main keep, up 2 flights of stairs and through a set of double doors carved with the royal coat of arms. As they approached, she could hear raised voices inside, anger and indignation echoing off stone walls. The guard opened the doors, and every head in the room turned to look at her. There must have been 30 nobles crowded into the chamber, all dressed in their finest, all wearing expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. At the far end, Edmund sat in a high-backed chair that wasn't quite a throne but close enough to make the statement clear. To his right stood Lord Aldrich, a stack of parchments in his hands, and satisfaction written across his face. And directly in front of the assembly, placed on a table like evidence at a trial, was her old dress. The one she'd hidden the letter in. The one she'd tucked under the mattress in the servants' quarters. Someone had found it. And from the way Aldrich was looking at her, she knew with absolute certainty that the letter was no longer there. Alara walked into the council chamber with her heart trying to claw its way out of her chest, but she kept her face blank. Her steps measured. She'd learned long ago that showing fear to predators only made them bite harder. The nobles parted slightly as she passed, their perfumed bodies and rustling silk creating a gauntlet of judgment. She could feel their eyes cataloging every detail, her bare feet, her common dress, the way her hair hung loose without pins or ribbons. Everything about her screamed outsider. Edmund's eyes met hers across the room, and she searched his face desperately for some signal, some indication of where he stood. But his expression was as carefully controlled as it had been in the throne room that first morning, giving nothing away. Only his left hand, gripping the arm of his chair tight enough to whiten his knuckles, suggested any emotion at all. Ah, our accused arrives, Lord Aldrich said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. How convenient. We were just discussing the evidence of your treachery. I'm not aware I've been accused of anything officially, Alara said, pleased that her voice came out steady. Last I knew, I was a guest of His Majesty. A ripple of murmurs spread through the assembled nobles. An older woman in deep purple leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind a jeweled fan. A younger man, barely older than Alara herself, stared at her with undisguised contempt. Guest. Aldrich savored the word like it was poisonous. Is that what we're calling infiltrators now? Perhaps His Majesty's kindness has made him blind too. Danger, but the rest of us see clearly enough. He lifted one of the parchments from his stack. Margaret Ashford, sister to the traitor Robert Ashford, disappeared from the Northern Territories 21 years ago. 3 months later, a woman matching her description appeared in Thornfield Village, calling herself Margaret Thorne. This woman, he pointed at Alara, is her daughter, born of rebel blood, raised on rebel hatred, and sent here to finish what her uncle started. That's a remarkable story, Alara said, forcing herself to sound calm, almost bored. Except for the small detail that it's complete fiction. My mother never spoke of rebellion, never showed interest in politics, never did anything more threatening than weave cloth and tend a garden. If she had a brother who was a traitor, she kept it secret even from me, which suggests she wanted nothing to do with his choices. Or, Aldrich countered smoothly, she was simply better at deception than most, playing the simple peasant while filling her daughter's head with vengeance. After all, he gestured to the dress on the table. If she was so innocent, why did she keep this? He lifted a piece of parchment from inside the dress's folds. Not the letter, something else. Ilara's blood turned to ice as she recognized the handwriting, her mother's cramped, careful script. But these weren't words about Edmund and his brother. These were names. Dozens of names, written in columns, some marked with small symbols. Beside them, a list, Aldrich said, his voice dripping with triumph, of northern families who supported the rebellion, some executed, some imprisoned, some escaped, all documented by Margaret Thorne, née Ashford, in her own hand. Tell me, girl, why would your innocent mother keep such detailed records unless she intended to use them? The room erupted in angry muttering. Ilara felt the walls closing in, her carefully constructed defense crumbling. She'd never seen that list before. Her mother had hidden it just as carefully as the letter about Edmund. But why? What had Margaret been planning? Your Majesty, Aldrich continued, turning to Edmund. This proves beyond doubt that the girl's mother maintained connections to the rebellion. And now the daughter appears with a convenient story about being saved 20 years ago, using your own guilt and compassion as weapons. It's a sophisticated plot, I'll grant her that, but a plot nonetheless. Where's the letter? Ilara blurted out, before she could stop herself. There was another document hidden in that dress. Where is it? Aldrich's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I found only this list. If there was anything else, perhaps you misremembered in your panic. He was lying. He had to be lying. But proving it would mean admitting the letter existed, which would raise questions about its contents, which would lead directly to the truth about Thomas's death. Ilara looked at Edmund again, and this time she saw something new in his face, a tightness around his mouth, a tension in his jaw. He knew. He knew Aldrich was lying, which meant he must have found the letter first, but he couldn't say so without explaining what it contained. They were trapped in a web of secrets, each one protecting the other from exposure, but also preventing any real defense. The list proves nothing, Ilara said, grasping for any argument that might stick. My mother could have kept those names for 100. Innocent reasons, remembering lost family members, trying to make sense of what happened. Grief makes people do strange things. Grief? A new voice cut through the room, sharp and cultured. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, older than Aldrich, but impeccably dressed in midnight blue. Let's not romanticize treason, girl. I lost my husband in the Northern Rebellion. He was a tax collector, murdered in his bed by Robert Ashford's followers. His crime? Doing his duty to the crown. So forgive me if I find your mother's grief less than sympathetic. Ilara's chest tightened. I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but I am not responsible for things that happened before I was born. Aren't you? The woman moved closer, and Ilara could see tears glittering in her eyes. You carry their blood. You were raised by one of them. How do we know that every word out of your mouth isn't calculated to manipulate our king? How do we know you're not exactly what Lord Aldrich says you are? Because, Edmund said quietly, and the entire room fell silent. I do remember her. Every eye turned to the king. He stood slowly, descending from the chair to the main floor of the chamber. The crowd parted for him automatically, ingrained deference making space. He walked until he stood directly in front of Ilara, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. I remember pulling a child from a burning cottage in Thornfield, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I remember her asking if I was an angel. I remember laughing despite the horror around us, because in that moment of innocence surrounded by death, her question felt like a small piece of light. He held up his left hand, showing the crescent scar. I remember cutting my palm on a piece of broken pottery as I carried her out. I remember promising I wouldn't forget her. Your Majesty, Aldrich said carefully, memories can be influenced by suggestion. She could have learned these details from survivors, from records. She knew about the pottery, Edmund interrupted. I've never told anyone that detail. Not you, not my personal guards, not the chroniclers who recorded the events of that day. The official reports say I injured my hand during combat, but the truth is I cut it on a piece of a child's broken cup while rescuing her. He looked back at Alara. What color was it? She blinked, confusion mixing with the terror still coursing through her veins. Then the memory surfaced, clear as spring water. Blue, she whispered, with yellow flowers painted around the rim. It was my favorite cup. My mother made me porridge in it every morning. Edmund nodded, something like relief crossing his face. Blue with yellow flowers. That's right. The chamber erupted in debate. Some nobles looked convinced, others skeptical. Aldrich's face had gone very still, calculating his next move. But Alara barely heard the noise. She was staring at Edmund, understanding flooding through her. He'd just committed himself publicly to her story, to her. Whatever happened now, he'd tied his credibility to hers. If she fell, he fell with her. However, Edmund continued, raising his voice over the din. Lord Aldrich raises valid concerns. The connection to the rebellion, however distant, cannot be ignored. Therefore, I propose a compromise. Aldrich's head snapped up. Your Majesty? Alara will remain in the castle under guard while a full investigation is conducted, not as a prisoner, but as someone under crown protection. We'll send inquiries to Thornfield, interview survivors of the raid, verify every detail of her story. If she's innocent, and I believe she is, then the investigation will prove it. If she's not, his voice hardened, then she'll face justice like any other traitor. It was brilliant, Alara realized. He was buying them time, creating space to maneuver, but it also meant she'd be trapped in the castle, vulnerable, while Aldrich continued to maneuver against her. And what of the marriage question? The woman in blue demanded. Are we to understand His Majesty still intends to pursue this inappropriate match? I intend, Edmund said coldly, to make decisions about my personal life without a committee. But to satisfy your concerns, Lady Ashton, I will delay any official announcement until the investigation is complete. That should give everyone time to adjust to the possibility. Lady Ashton. The name struck Alara like a physical blow. You're from the Ashford family. The woman's expression was pure ice. I married into it, yes, before the rebellion tore everything apart. So you see, girl, I have more right than anyone to judge what your blood means, and I find you wanting. The irony was almost laughable. Lady Ashton had married into the same family Alara had been born into, and now she stood here condemning Alara for that very connection. But there was too much pain in the older woman's eyes for Alara to find any humor in it. The, investigation will begin immediately, Edmund announced. Lord Aldrich, you'll lead it, but I want regular reports, daily, and I want transparency. No secret tribunals, no midnight judgments. Everything in the light where the truth can be seen. Aldrich bowed, but his smile was sharp as broken glass. As you command, Your Majesty. Though I should mention, investigations of this nature often uncover unexpected truths about many people. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Aldrich wasn't just warning Alara, he was warning Edmund. Keep pushing and I'll dig deep enough to find all the buried bodies. The assembly began to disperse, nobles clustering in small groups to whisper and speculate. Alara stood frozen in the center of the chamber, feeling like a mouse surrounded by cats. Edmund moved close to her, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. The letter is safe, he breathed. Hidden where Aldrich will never find it, but he knows it existed. He'll keep searching. What do we do? She whispered back. We survive, he said simply. Day by day, move by move, like chess. Before she could respond, Lord Aldrich appeared at Edmund's elbow. Your Majesty, A word in private. There are additional matters regarding the investigation that require your immediate attention." Edmund's jaw tightened, but he nodded. As he turned to follow Aldrich, he glanced back at Alara one last time, and in his eyes she saw what he couldn't say aloud. "I'm sorry. I'm trying. Hold on." Then he was gone, swept away by advisors and nobles and the weight of a crown that suddenly seemed impossibly heavy. The guard from earlier approached Alara. "Miss, I'm to escort you back to your quarters." She followed him in numb silence, back through corridors that felt more like a labyrinth now, each turn taking her deeper into a castle that might become her tomb. When they reached the tower room, she found Mira waiting inside, pale and shaking. "I heard everything," Mira said, wringing her, hands. "The whole castle is talking about it. Lady Ashton is calling for your execution. Some of the younger nobles are defending you. It's chaos." Ilara sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Did you know? About my mother's connection to the Ashford family?" "No," Mira said. "I swear. I'm from the north, yes, but my village was far from the rebellion's center. I knew of Robert Ashford like everyone did, the traitor who nearly destroyed the kingdom. But I never knew he had a sister." "Neither did I," Ilara said hollowly. She looked at her hands, half expecting to see blood on them, the stain of a legacy she'd never asked for. "My mother kept so many secrets. I thought I knew her, but maybe I never did at all." Mira sat beside her carefully. "Or maybe she loved you enough to carry those secrets alone, to make sure you could grow up free of them. Perhaps. Or perhaps Margaret had been waiting, planning, keeping records for a purpose Alara would never understand now." She thought of the list of names, all those families marked and documented. Had her mother been trying to seek vengeance or prevent it? Had she been part of the rebellion's remnants, or working against them? The questions spiraled endlessly, and there was no one left alive to answer them. 3 days passed like a slow execution. Ilara remained locked in the tower room while the castle churned with rumors and speculation below. Mira brought meals and whispered news. The investigation was spreading beyond the castle walls, messengers riding hard to Thornfield and the Northern Territories. Lord Aldrich had personally interrogated 5 servants already, looking for any connection between Alara and possible rebel sympathizers. Lady Ashton had written to 3 neighboring kingdoms, warning them about the dangerous woman who'd infiltrated the court, and Edmund had not come to see her once. On the 4th morning, Alara woke to shouting in the courtyard. She pressed her face to the window glass and saw riders approaching the gates, their horses lathered with sweat. They carried banners she didn't recognize, green and silver, an eagle in flight. Within minutes, the castle erupted in activity. Servants rushed through corridors, guards assembled in formation, and bells rang from the chapel tower. Mira burst into the room without knocking, her face flushed. "You need to prepare yourself, now." "What's happening?" Alara asked, but her hands were already shaking as she reached for the cleanest dress available. "Princess Isabella of Crestfall has arrived," Mira said, helping her lace the back of the gown. 2 weeks early and without warning. She's demanding an immediate audience with the king about the rumors of his engagement to you." Ilara's stomach dropped. Princess Isabella, the woman Lord Aldrich had been trying to marry Edmund to for years. The alliance that would secure borders and fill treasuries. And now she was here, probably furious, definitely powerful, and absolutely not interested in letting a peasant girl steal her crown. "Why are you telling me to prepare?" Alara asked. "I'm confined to this room." "Because," Mira said grimly, "she's demanded you be present at the audience. She wants to see her competition." 20 minutes later, Ilara found herself back in the throne room, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. The space felt charged, electric with tension. Edmund sat on the throne looking more kingly than she'd ever seen. Him, crown on his head, royal robes, every inch the sovereign. Lord Aldrich stood at his right hand, practically vibrating with satisfaction, and striding up the center of the room, flanked by a dozen knights in green and silver, was the most beautiful woman Alara had ever seen. Princess Isabella was tall, willowy, with golden hair intricately braided and woven with emeralds. Her dress was deep forest green silk that probably cost more than Alara's entire village made in a year. She moved with absolute confidence, someone who'd never questioned her right to exist in spaces of power. When she reached the throne, she didn't bow. Instead, she studied Edmund with eyes the color of ice chips. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of Crestfall's northern regions. "I apologize for arriving without formal announcement, but the rumors reaching my father's court were so alarming that I felt immediate action was necessary." "Princess Isabella," Edmund said formally, "you are always welcome in our kingdom, though I confess I'm unclear about what rumors would warrant such urgent travel." Isabella's laugh was sharp as crystal. "Don't insult my intelligence by playing ignorant. The entire region is buzzing with news that you've taken a peasant girl as your betrothed. A peasant with connections to the Northern Rebellion, no less. Naturally, my father and I are concerned about what this means for the alliance we've been carefully building these past 3 years." "No, betrothal has been announced," Edmund said carefully. "You've responded to rumors, not facts. Then let me see her." Isabella turned, scanning the room until her gaze landed on Alara, standing near the back with her guard escort. "Ah, there, bring her forward." It wasn't a request. Alara walked forward on legs that felt made of water, aware of every eye tracking her progress. When she reached the dais, she curtsied awkwardly, unused to the formal gesture. Isabella circled her slowly, like a horse trader evaluating livestock. "So, this is the girl who's captured your heart," Isabella said, her tone making it clear she found that impossible to believe. "She's pretty enough, I suppose, in a common sort of way. Tell me, girl, what makes you think you're qualified to be queen?" Alara felt anger kindle in her chest, hot and sudden. "With respect, Your Highness, I don't recall applying for a position." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled courtiers. One simply didn't speak to royalty that way. But Isabella's eyebrows rose with something that might have been respect. "Spirit," she said. "That's something, at least." She turned back to Edmund. "Your Majesty, I'll be direct. My father sent me here to finalize our engagement. We've been negotiating for 3 years, and now suddenly you're entertaining a peasant girl with treasonous blood. This is either a very elaborate insult, or you've lost your mind." "Neither," Edmund said, his voice hardening. "I'm considering all options for my kingdom's future. That includes alliances through marriage, but it also includes other considerations." "What other considerations could possibly outweigh an alliance with Crestfall?" Isabella demanded. "Our combined kingdoms would be the strongest force in the region. We'd have security, prosperity, military strength. What does she offer you?" She gestured dismissively at Alara. "A connection to rebels and the contempt of your entire noble class?" "She offers honesty," Edmund said, quietly, and the room went deadly silent. "She offers perspective I don't get from people who've lived their entire lives in palaces. She offers a reminder that the crown exists to serve all people, not just those with titles." Isabella's face flushed. How noble, how extraordinarily naive. "You can't rule a kingdom on philosophy, Your Majesty. You need resources, treaties, military alliances, things my marriage would provide, things she never could." "Actually," a new voice cut in, "that's not entirely accurate." Everyone turned to find Lord Aldrich stepping forward, holding yet another document. Alara's heart sank. What now? What fresh evidence had he manufactured to destroy her? But Aldrich wasn't looking at Alara. He was looking at Edmund with an expression Alara couldn't quite read. "Your Majesty, my investigation has uncovered something unexpected. The list of names found in Margaret Thorne's possession. I've spent the past 3 days verifying them, cross-referencing with court records, interviewing survivors, checking lineages, and," Edmund's voice was tight, "and I've discovered that Margaret Thorne wasn't documenting rebel sympathizers," Aldrich said slowly. "She was documenting their victims. Every name on that list belongs to someone who was falsely accused during the rebellion's aftermath. People who were executed or imprisoned despite having no connection to Robert Ashford's cause. People who were condemned because it was politically convenient, because someone wanted their land, or simply because paranoia made everyone see traitors in shadows. The air left Ilara's lungs in a rush. Her mother hadn't been planning vengeance. She'd been documenting injustice. Margaret Thorne had notes next to several names. Aldrich continued. Details about their families, about what happened to their children after they were killed. He paused, and for the first time since Ilara had met him, Aldrich looked genuinely affected. She was trying to track the, orphans, to know where they'd ended up, if they'd survived. It appears she'd been sending anonymous donations to several families over the years. Small amounts. Nothing that would draw attention, but enough to help them survive. How do you know this? Edmund asked, leaning forward. Because I found the records of payment, Aldrich said, hidden in various merchant accounts throughout the region. Small charitable donations from a friend in the South. I tracked them back through financial records. Every payment coincides with dates Margaret Thorne sold cloth at market. She was spending her earnings to help the families of people who'd been unjustly killed in your name, Your Majesty. The silence that followed was crushing. Ilara felt tears burning her eyes and didn't bother to hide them. Her mother. Quiet, sad Margaret, who'd worked herself to exhaustion and never explained why she had no money despite working so hard. Who'd died in poverty because she'd been sending what little. She had to help children who'd lost everything. This changes nothing, Lady Ashton said sharply from the crowd. She was still Robert Ashford's sister. Her charity doesn't erase her blood. No, Edmund said, standing. But it speaks to her character, and it raises uncomfortable questions about our justice during that time. He looked at Aldrich. Questions I intend to answer. I want a full review of every execution from the rebellion's aftermath, every imprisonment, every exile, if innocent. People died because we were too eager for vengeance. Then we owe their families, accountability. Your Majesty? Isabella interjected, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. This is all very touching, but it doesn't address the core issue. Are you seriously considering marrying this girl? Edmund looked at Ilara, and she saw him weighing everything. The alliance with Crestfall, the political stability, the expectations of the nobility. She saw him calculating what choice would be best for the kingdom. And she knew, with sudden certainty, what was coming. Princess Isabella, he said, turning back to her, I owe you an apology. The negotiations with your father were conducted in good faith, and I should have informed you both immediately when circumstances changed. That was discourteous of me. Isabella's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying I cannot offer you the alliance your father seeks, Edmund said quietly. Because I am going to marry. Ilara of Thornfield! The throne room exploded. Nobles shouted protests. Isabella's face went white with fury, and Aldrich looked like he'd been struck by lightning. But Edmund raised his hand, commanding silence through sheer force of will. However, he continued once the noise died down, I am prepared to offer Crestfall different terms, a trade agreement that would be more profitable than a marriage alliance, military cooperation without the complication of merged royal houses, and he looked at Isabella directly. My support for your own claim to your father's throne when the time comes. I understand you have brothers who might contest that succession. I would publicly back your right to rule Crestfall. Isabella's expression shifted, fury giving way to calculation. Everyone in the room knew her father favored her youngest brother, that she'd been fighting for recognition her entire life. What Edmund was offering was potentially more valuable than being his queen. That's not a small offer, she said slowly. No, Edmund agreed. It's not. And it would require the same trust and partnership that a marriage would have, just structured differently. Princess Isabella studied him for a long moment, then looked at Ilara with new eyes. You love her, she said, not quite a question. Edmund hesitated, and Ilara's breath caught. I believe she and I can build something worth more than political convenience. I believe her mother's example of quiet. Heroism is exactly the kind of virtue this kingdom needs to remember. And yes, I believe I could love her, given time. Could love her. Not loved her yet, but could. It was honest, and somehow that honesty meant more than any dramatic declaration. Isabella nodded slowly. I'll need those terms in writing, reviewed by my advisors. If they're acceptable to my father, you'll have your trade agreement. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Your Majesty, I think you're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which. I'll let you know when I figure it out myself, Edmund said with a slight smile. As Isabella swept from the room with her entourage, the assembled nobles erupted in debate again. Lady Ashton was shouting about impropriety. Younger lords were arguing about precedent. And through it all, Lord Aldrich stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed power structure crumbling around him. Edmund descended from the throne and walked directly to Ilara. The crowd parted automatically, and suddenly they were standing face to face in the center of chaos. I should have asked you first, he said quietly, before announcing it to the entire court. That was presumptuous of me. You're the king, Ilara said, her voice shaking. You're allowed to be presumptuous. Not with you. He took her hand, the left one, and she felt the ridge of his crescent scar against her palm. So I'm asking now, Ilara of Thornfield, daughter of Margaret, who was braver than anyone knew, will you marry me? Not because of blackmail or survival or political maneuvering, but because I think we might actually build something good together. Something your mother would have been proud of. Ilara looked at this complicated man who'd killed his brother and spent 20 years trying to atone for it, who'd found her mother's charity and honored it, who'd risked his crown and his carefully built stability for a girl he barely knew. She thought about her mother, quietly helping. Orphans for decades, carrying the weight of knowing terrible secrets and never using them for personal gain. Margaret had chosen mercy over vengeance, silence over exposure, generosity over survival. And now her daughter stood in a throne room being offered a crown. Yes, Ilara said, and felt the words settle into her bones like truth. Yes, I'll marry you. Edmund smiled, really smiled, not the careful, almost expression, but genuine joy, and kissed her hand. Around them, the court continued to argue and speculate, but for just that moment, none of it mattered. Lord Aldrich appeared at Edmund's elbow, his face carefully neutral. Your Majesty, we should discuss the implications. Later, Aldrich, Edmund said, not looking away from Ilara. Right now, I'm going to take my future queen to see the gardens. The roses are blooming, and she's been trapped inside for 4 days. Everything else can wait. They walked out of the throne room together, leaving scandal and speculation in their wake. And Ilara realized something that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. She'd come to this castle planning to blackmail a king, to secure her survival through manipulation and threats. Instead, she'd discovered the truth about her mother's quiet heroism, found a man whose guilt matched her desperation, and somehow stumbled into the possibility of something real. The future was uncertain. The nobles would resist, Aldrich would scheme, and learning to be queen would be harder than anything she'd ever done. But as Edmund led her through corridors filled with spring light, their fingers still intertwined, she thought maybe, just maybe, her mother had known exactly what she was doing when she hid that letter. Not to destroy a king, but to save her daughter. To give her one impossible chance at a different life. And in the end, Margaret's final gift had been far more valuable than any crown. It had been the choice itself, the agency to decide her own fate, to walk into power and danger and the unknown with her eyes open. Thank you, Ilara whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to Edmund or to her mother's memory, or to whatever strange providence had brought her here. Edmund squeezed her hand gently. For what? For seeing past what I tried to be, she said, to who I actually am. Well, he said with that almost smile that was becoming familiar, you did the same for me, so I suppose we're even. They stepped out into the gardens where roses bloomed in impossible profusion, red and white and yellow. their perfume sweet on the spring air. And for the first time since her mother had died, Alara felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt hope. Sometimes the heaviest chains we carry aren't made of iron, but of secrets passed down through generations. Alara walked into that castle believing survival was her only goal, only to discover that her mother had been carrying the weight of justice in silence for 20 years. Margaret could have used what she knew for revenge, for wealth, for power. Instead, she chose something far more difficult. She chose to help the innocent victims of someone else's war, spending her last coin to feed orphans while her own daughter went hungry. What would you have done if you discovered your mother had sacrificed everything, not for you, but for strangers who would never know her name? Would you honor that legacy of quiet heroism, or would you resent the poverty it left behind? And what about Edmund, the king who built his entire reign on a murder he committed in rage? He could have been a tyrant, using his stolen crown to justify any cruelty. Instead, he spent 2 decades trying to be worthy of something he took by force. He wrote confessions knowing they could destroy him. He ruled with mercy when vengeance would have been easier. But does good governance erase the sin of how power was obtained? Can 20 years of righteousness balance the scales against 1 moment of violence? These aren't easy questions, and that's exactly why they matter. Because life rarely offers us clear heroes and obvious villains. Most of us are just people trying to do better than our worst moments, carrying guilt and hope in equal measure. Alara's story reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose mercy when we have every right to choose revenge. That sometimes love isn't a lightning bolt but a conscious decision to build something good from broken pieces. That now, the legacies we inherit, whether crowns or shame or secrets written on hidden letters, don't have to define us. We get to choose what we do with what we've been given. So here's my question for you. When life hands you the power to destroy someone who wronged you, what kind of person will you choose to be? If this story moved you, if it made you think about mercy and justice, and the complicated weight of being human, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to follow more stories that challenge us to be better than we were yesterday. And leave a comment telling me, would you have burned the letter or used it? Because that choice says everything about who we are.